Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar this evening. We'll be looking at the archaeology of East Leeds. I hope everyone's comfortable and ready to find out what's been going on there. So I'm Natasha and I work at Wessex Archaeology and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator. So Wessex Archaeology is a commercial archaeology unit, and that means when construction's happening or when developers are disturbing the land in any way, they have to have archaeological work done on that land before they can build a house, build a railway line, build a road, whatever it may be. So they have an archaeological survey on there, and that's where Wessex Archaeology comes in. Construction companies can commission us to do the archaeological work on that land. So this might be in many different forms. Sometimes you might not even know it's happening. It can be done by desk-based assessments, it can be done by trial trenching, or it can be full-scale mitigation works, so full-scale excavation works. Wessex Archaeology is also an educational charity. So that means whatever we find when we're digging or when we're excavating sites or doing research, we try and share those findings with the public. So we do that through webinars such as this one. We also work with school groups and local community groups. We might do more detailed projects, and we'll look for opportunities for volunteers to take part as well. So the reason we're here today is because Wessex Archaeology are working in Leeds on the East Leeds Orbital Route. So to give us a bit of context about the road and also to tell you a bit about Balfour Beatty, one of the company we're working for, I have Glenn on the line. So hello, Glenn.
Hi, Natasha.
Hi, can you tell us a bit? Can you tell us a bit about Balfour Beatty?
Sorry, I'm Glenn Kilvington, one of the project managers currently working on the scheme for Balfour Beatty, currently managing the roadworks section of the project. We're working in partnership with Leeds City Council to construct a new piece of infrastructure to relieve congestion on the outer ring road and provide improved access to junction 46 of the M1 and into development land on the east side of the city. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of some of the detail of the project already, but basically it's a 7-kilometre long orbital route and it provides pedestrian, equestrian and cycling infrastructure. Unfortunately, due to the time that the archaeology works on site, coincided with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has limited our ability to engage with members of the public and local interest groups, which has been disappointing for us. But trying to adjust to the new normal, we've worked around it, and hopefully here we've produced an informative webinar that gives you an insight of the works that have been undertaken on site. And it's really pleasing to see, I think we've got over 300 people registered tonight. So I'll hand you back to the Wessex team now and hope you enjoy the session, and we'll catch up with you at the end for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Glenn. So to begin the session, I thought I would show you a nice video of footage from our site, and it will offer you a bit of context about the archaeological works happening. So you should now see a video pop up on your screen.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm the Archaeological Project Officer for the East Leeds Orbital Ring Road scheme. And I'm going to take you on a little walk around one of our current active sites. So we've got quite a lot of sites open at the moment, investigating all sorts of things from Romano-British enclosures to medieval and post-medieval settlement sites. We've got a World War I shell filling station at the very southern end of our scheme, and we're about to have a little look at some ditches that are sort of in the beginning of being excavated that we think are post-medieval and possibly some sort of denoting some sort of trackway or hollow way. So I'll go and have a show you what's going on. Apologise in advance for the wind and the rain and the weather. It's one of the fun things that we're up against as we're out on site, but here we go. So this is our area 20. As you can see, we've got lots of people working out on site. We're all doing really well dealing with the COVID situation as well as everything else we've got to deal with. So if you do spot people who aren't social distancing, they are ones who are currently living together. So please don't worry about that. Everybody else is keeping their distance. So as we go up the site, You can see these sort of two parallel dark strips of the landscape running up to the top of the hill, which are some of the ditches. We'll go and get a closer look. So here we go, a ditch running up the hill here. So some people will be excavating, some people are recording. So Alex, who you can see just ahead of you, is sat doing a detailed recording of the feature on tablets, which is what we use now. Very exciting, moving with the times. So I'll have a little look at this one up here, which has been dug by Richie, which is particularly good. You can see the definition in the different features. So we've got a sort of central area sat here, and then off to the right of it we've got a ditch running along the right, and to the left we've got a great big ditch which is cut into the bedrock, and you can see there the base of it, which is just getting cleaned up. A lovely sharp size. So as I say, we've had post-medieval pottery out of these ditches, so we don't think we're in Romano British or Roman at the moment. We're going to have a little chat with Rose, and she can tell us what a day is like in the life of a field archaeologist. I would love to say it's not always this wet and miserable, but sometimes the sun shines. So Rose is excavating the terminus, so the end of a ditch. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm alright.
Are you happy to tell these guys what you get up to in a typical day?
Yeah, sure. Basically, we get to site about 8 o'clock in the morning, ready for work, put on our PPE. If it's raining, obviously we have coats as well for that. And then the supervisors have usually marked out a lot of the features on a site. And so we come along and start to dig the site out. I'm actually working on a terminus at the moment, which is like an end point to something. And I'm currently recording because I finished digging up the site, up the particular feature, and now it's about drawing it, measuring it, and making sure it's all accurate so that when it goes uploads to the information that people in PostEx need. Yeah, so it's all there.
Brilliant. So yeah, we've got a tape measure laid out there so we can make sure we get some accurate records, because obviously archaeology is very destructive, so once we have excavated we have dug it away, so we need to make sure that the recording is spot on. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. So there we go, a little quick trip across one of our sites at Leeds.
So hopefully that was a nice introduction to the site for everyone. And now I have Emily with me, who you saw in that video, and she is running the site at Leeds. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. This is me outside of my work PPE. So yeah, hi, I'm Emily. I am the on-site project officer. I've been working in commercial archaeology now since 2007, and I've got quite a lot of varied experience. So I've worked on other rural road schemes before. I was part of a team that excavated the A1 back when they were extending it. I've also more recently led a small team with the excavations of Marshall's Mill in the centre of Leeds. So I've got varied experience and sort of local experience as well. We've been on site now as a team since March. It's been a strange 5 months, a bit of a time warp. Nobody quite knows what day it is with all of the COVID things at the moment, but we've managed to get the job done. We've done lots of varied types of investigations, as Natasha's already mentioned, and I think Emma will go on to mention in a moment, but we've been on site doing watching briefs for sort of the groundwork that's got less of an impact. And then we started off with an archaeological evaluation, and where we highlighted areas of archaeology and that we've got on to mitigate and open up much larger sites like the one you've just seen on the video. And yeah, I'll be around to answer questions in the Q&A as well, so feel free to test us.
Thank you, Emily. So now I'm going to start the presentation part of the webinar, and I'm joined by my colleague Emma and Jenny for this. So Emma is going to talk us through the site and take us on a bit of a journey, and then Jenny is in our finds department and she's going to tell us about some of the artefacts we found on site throughout the presentation. So hello both.
Hi Tash, thanks very much. Brilliant. Shall I begin?
Yes, I think we'll start.
Lovely. So thank you all for joining us today and taking the time to watch this webinar. Like Tash said, my name is Emma Carter and I'm a commercial archaeologist for Wessex Archaeology. Now, during the course of this session, we'll look at the archaeology of East Leeds Orbital Route. We'll see how we delve into the archives and consult historical sources and how we can look beneath the ground without digging it. We'll also see how our amazing team of 45 archaeologists, that's Emily included, have worked and slogged through the rain and the heat to unearth the evocative discoveries that we'll show you today. So from hidden axes and elusive battlegrounds, Roman enclosures and hoofprints preserved in the earth for hundreds of years, East Leeds Orbital Route is steeped in history and has the potential to reveal artefacts from each period of history on this timeline. So let's start with where to dig. Now, before we can begin our excavations on site, we need to undertake research. We can't just dig anywhere. So an incredible amount of work goes into our initial research. The first thing we do is a desk-based assessment, and that's undertaken to build up a focused and bespoke history specific to the site. And this helps us to determine really the archaeological potential.
So Emma, what are all the books in this picture?
So these books are taken from Inside Leeds Archive Service, and they show, like you said, a row of old books, and they are the sort of records that we might consult to try and build up the picture of East Leeds Orbital Route. Now, if you are a bit of a local historian or a history buff, you can actually go visit those archives yourself, but I do recommend looking up their collections online so you can actually plan your visit. Now, I also know that one of the big talking points about the archaeology along the route of East Leeds Orbital is the infamous Battle of Winwade. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the Anglo-Saxon Battle of Winwade was between the pagan King Penda and the Christian King Oswy. Now, King Oswy was actually victorious and he slayed King Penda, and according to Bede, this was actually the end of Anglo-Saxon paganism. So this seems like it's a pretty important battle, doesn't it? But we still don't actually know where it was, and we haven't found any evidence to date of this battle so far on the site. We do have some clues that suggest that the victorious King Oswy ended his campaign in the district of Loidis, which is now Leeds, and there are also references to it being near the Cock Beck. Now, these important moments in our history still echo in the place names in the surrounding area, so the next time that you cross Penda's Field, you might consider the defeated pagan king. Whilst early documentary evidence and sources may be subject to a rather venerable opinion, we can actually turn to technology to help us gain more accurate insights. Geophysics provides us with an incredible opportunity to actually see beneath the ground without having to dig it. So this white H shape is the gradiometer, and the small box in the middle measures the magnetic resistivity, and that's the magnetometer. It's able to actually send a pulse into the ground, and it measures how long it takes for that pulse to come back, and that enables us to do very rapid mapping of objects, features or deposits in the earth, which geophysics can actually interpret potentially as archaeological features. So as part of the work that were done prior to us digging on site, there was a geophysical survey undertaken in 2016 by WIASP, and the results identified some pretty amazing things. And one of the things across the route they looked at were Iron Age and Romano-British field systems, enclosures and tracks, areas of industrial activity, medieval ridge and furrows, that's a result of farming, a post-medieval quarry, also former field boundaries correlating to old historic maps, and of course modern field drains and service pipes. So we'll be looking at some of the exciting results from the Romano-British field system and enclosures a little bit later, but the scope and range of potential features based on the geophysics is really exciting and helps us prepare for what we might need on site. So the incredible amount of work has also occurred when we get onto site, and the route is 7 kilometres long. Our team have excavated 211 trenches. There are 25 archaeological areas, 45 archaeologists and 1 scheduled monument. So you can imagine it's quite a big site and it has quite a big impact. So now that we've narrowed down the area of archaeological potential, we must assess them. The sites at Ellor vary between trial trenching and mitigation, so just a quick word on terminology and methodology. So trial trenching comes first, and we place trenches along the routes of the scheme to evaluate the archaeological potential. We'll target areas with known archaeological anomalies highlighted by geophysics or historic research, and we'll also target areas that are thought to be archaeologically blank. This enables us to provide a comprehensive and actually comparable data set, and in some instances the absence of archaeology can be just as important. Now, if those trenches go on to reveal significant features, we will then be asked to go on to mitigation, and this is where we mitigate the impact of any future works on the archaeological resource through large-scale excavation, investigation and recording of these features, so just like what you saw in Emily's video on site. We can also do more intense analysis in our labs at this stage, and we can look at things like soil samples, bones or other artefacts to help us give a greater idea about the past. So our story starts with the search for the missing Mesolithic. So by searching for those sporadic moments in prehistoric activity, those very early signs of people utilising that hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which then might evolve and develop over the centuries and millennia into rural settlements and landscapes with set places to revere the dead, we actually see a lot of this on East Leeds Orbital Route, as we see communities steeped together in agriculture. Now, one of our aims was the test for the Mesolithic activity along the route, and this reconstruction that you can see shows a Mesolithic hunting camp. It's without structures or defensive features, so it's quite difficult for us to actually determine how we could see signs of occupation and those signs of movement of those Mesolithic peoples across the landscape. Now, those ephemeral traces can be seen in scatters of flints, so we actually undertook a series of test pitting to search for that flint. Unfortunately, we didn't find any, although there was actually a modest assemblage of medieval and modern pottery were revealed through the test pitting. Now, as we move from the Stone Age and into the Bronze Age, we actually begin to see our landscape change across Britain as there's widespread occupation but of low intensity, and that begins to occur. There's also been some really incredible research into pollen analysis, and that's actually ascertained that forest clearance begins around this time. So we begin to see a landscape with limited agricultural agricultural activity, and then supplemented by maintenance of hunter-gatherer activities as well. So we start to see less trees and more fields.
Wonderful, and I think we're going to break away at this point to have a look at our first artefact from the site. So I have Jenny here, and we also have my colleague Beth down in Salisbury, and she is going to show us the find live on camera.
Thanks, Tash. So yes, first of all, while we're waiting for that to come through, just to give a bit of a definition. So we've been calling things artefacts, but we also call them finds. So anything that's been found is a find. So if we mention the find word, that's what we're referring to. But to define that, it is anything that has been made by a human or anything that's been modified by a human, that is decreed to be an artefact. So, for example, you could have a willow tree, but that's not an artefact or a find until someone comes along and modifies it, maybe to coppice it, for example, or to cut down it and make it into planks. So, to bear that in mind, what we have here is a really special find, and our earliest find by far from this site, and it is a bronze axe head. And it's a Bronze Age axe head, which means it has been dated to 2500 BC to 2000 BC. So this really is quite a phenomenal thing to have discovered on the site in Leeds. Unfortunately, it was a find that didn't have anything else associated with it, so we call that unstratified. So there's a limited amount, unfortunately, that we can get from this. However, we can tell that it is that early, the earliest part of the Bronze Age, because it is quite plain and straightforward. You can see Beth showing us there. There's no ridged edges to it. There's no little nicks or grooves or anything that would help it to be hafted or attached to the handle of the axe. This is just plain straightforward, so it would just have been inserted into a piece of wood rather than tied on, as you might see in some of the other pictures there that Tash has added to the slideshow.
Can I just say, if you would like to make the axe bigger, you can just hover over the axe live camera screen and 2 arrows will appear, and if you click that, it will make that screen bigger for you.
Thanks, Tash. So you can see Beth in the corner holding it up for you to have a look at. So what you can see on this is that it is quite narrow, quite smooth. There's no ridges or flanges, as they're called, to the edges of it, which would allow it to be hafted easier. So that is our first fascinating find.
It's absolutely amazing. Thanks, Jenny. So as you've just seen, as we begin to move through the prehistoric and into later periods, we do see an increase in sophistication of agricultural landscape management. Now, I mentioned earlier in our talk that the geophysics conducted by WAS in 2016 revealed some brilliant examples of Iron Age or Romano-British features, and that's what we'll go on to look at. If we can get the next slide. Fantastic, thanks Tash. So this type of map is really important for us. So those pink lines are the archaeological anomalies identified during that geophysical survey, and the black and blue lines are the features that Emily and her team have excavated on site. So Tash, if you were to look at this map, could you perhaps pick anything out? Does anything look familiar or comparable to the modern day?
I think I can see this large square, and then I can see other smaller squares within it. Maybe like a map of a building, something like that.
Yeah, it looks a bit like a foundation, doesn't it? So we actually have a large enclosure with smaller divisions on the inside. And then if you just go on to that next slide, fantastic. We have this lovely trackway with those 2 parallel ditches running from the southwest and the northeast. So just to give you an idea of scale, the enclosure is over 200 meters wide. So I keep talking about this enclosure, so let's get some definitions in there. An enclosure can be any shape and uses ditches, banks, or even fencing to separate one area from the other. Enclosures get their name because they enclose, and they can be used around cemeteries, domestic dwellings, farming areas, places of ritual, and even fortification. So with so many potential uses and purposes, we need to use research agendas to focus our excavations, and so we can contribute to these little pockets of history that require more research. So some of the questions that we have on site is, what purpose did the interior have? How do we know it's Roman? How could Iron Age people have lived here, and do we have any evidence for that? How big was the farm? And what would the landscape have looked like at that time? So one of the main questions, how do we know it's Roman? I think Jenny has a little bit more of an update for us, and Tash might be able to help us kind of reconstruct some of those Roman artifacts.
So I think Jenny has some Roman pottery to show us, and I'm going to show you one using our Sketchfab site. So I'll change the screen now. So Sketchfab is available. You just look at it on Google. I'll send the links out in the follow-up email, so anyone can go on and look at Sketchfab, and you get 3D models. So it's a way of viewing 3D models like this. So this is some Samian ware.
So as Emma's saying, we have had some finds back just last week, so they haven't been looked at by our specialists just yet, but we are fairly confident that this is, if you can see that, a lovely large shard piece of Samian ware or Roman pottery. I was trying to hold it from all the angles so you can see how similar that is in profile to the bowl that Tash is showing you there in the 3D reconstruction. Show you the inside of it. So we have the base, around the base, the foot that it sits on. We have some of the inside hollow, sorry, and we have the top lip of it as well. So we should be able to reconstruct the whole bowl from this, although it doesn't have any decoration on this right that we've got. So once that's with our specialists, we'll be able to give you some more information on that. But that's a really fascinating thing that's just come in, so we're hoping for more.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you. So back on our map, we did see that big square with the smaller squares in it, And if any of you have farms or work on them or visit them, I want you to think about what sort of footprint all those buildings and sheds would leave behind. And that's actually quite similar to what we have here. However, instead of structures and mortar, we have a landscape organised by field systems and enclosures and ditches. So if we just have a look at some of those images on site, fantastic. So this is a really interesting image. It gives you another idea of what life is like on site, but also how we can see the features there. So what we have in the middle is this big linear, so that's a large long ditch going all the way across, and it goes from the foreground to the background. So if you see my colleague wearing full orange high-vis, he's actually helping us there because that is the route or line of the ditch. We can also see in the mid-ground, we have going off towards the left of the image a little slot that shows one of the spurs coming off that ditch. Fantastic, thanks Tash. Now what I really want to sort of bring your eye to is this slot, so the excavated area that we have put in ourselves to learn more about this ditch's kind of purpose and what it does. So you might be able to pick out that there's a red and white scale bar, and then there's a change in soil where we see the excavated cut and then the section. So the section is what I'm talking about now. So that's where we've found the feature, we've taken some of the fill out, and we can see that profile. The profile is really interesting in determining what type of purpose it has. And we can see that on the left side, it's quite steep. And then as it goes up towards the right-hand side of the image, it almost has those steps coming up. So this suggests that they may want to keep or segregate animals from two areas. So it's either stopping animals coming into an area, or it's keeping those animals in place. Now the way that we can suggest that is that the step side, the animal could be, I don't know, sheep or cattle, might fall into one side down the step and actually think, oh, I can't get up that steep bit, it's just too awkward and too steep and muddy, so I'll go back the way I came. So it's a really simple and effective way of kind of having animal management within the landscape itself. Okay. And there is another image here of another big long ditch. So this one's going diagonally from the bottom left of our site. Yep, fantastic, along the right. And there are some really interesting deposits in there already. It's so in sort of the mid-ground again of the photograph, we've got this kind of darker deposit with elements of sort of those orangey colours. So that might be a bit of ceramic building material and things like that. But again, the profile, really different. So when we talk about ditches are exciting because they can do more than one thing. They're not just a big long hole in the ground, they've got a purpose. And again, with this one, we'll try and look at the profile to try and determine that purpose, and we'll also potentially do environmental samples as well. Amazing. So this is really interesting. So we're looking at trying to find out here the different phases of occupation. We mentioned in the research aims that we wanted to know that if the Iron Age people were on the site as well.
So Emma, what do you mean by the different phases of occupation?
So phases of occupation could be multiple phases of use in the same period, or we could have phases of use within different periods, and that will suggest long-term use of the landscape. And it really tells us things like if you just have a small hamlet and then you see get more houses, becomes a village and eventually a town, all those different points, those are phases of occupation. And we're looking at that on a bit of a smaller scale, but no less important for this site here. So we can see this lovely sort of curving shape coming round. If you can't quite get your eye on, it's fine. The ground is all brown, isn't it? If you look to the right of the image, we have a little arrow pointing to that curved shape as well.
So what's the significance of the curved shape?
So the curved shape is really different to all the other kind of strong, straight, parallel lines. As archaeologists, we need to kind of investigate and assess things and try and find out what's going on. And it's quite odd if you have all these wonderful straight lines that are very, very Roman, and then we've got this little soft whisper of a curve or like a fingernail crescent coming through. You can see in the picture there's actually quite big. So what we'll try and do now on site is do a slot through the two features and try and see which one came first. So, and we'll be able to tell from that by the section So we can, if you look back at the main survey image, we've got that straight ditch going down, and then those kind of fingernail curves look like they're going underneath it. So that will be a different phase. Brilliant. So we've got two images here of the same feature. So the first one is the ditch section, and this is where you see that red and white scale bar. The scale bar is a meter, so that might help you determine just quite what an effort it is to dig these ditches. What's really interesting about this one, again, is the profile of it, is of that shape. And hopefully we can distinguish that it has this kind of filtering shape going down into a little bit just there. Can you see that? Wonderful.
So Emma, how does an archaeologist spot these features? Because to me, it looks all very muddy.
It is, you kind of have to be a bit of a kind of a soil wizard, and we have to look at the soil, and we actually quantify or catalogue what kind of soil colour and type and feel it is. So if you look at the image on the left, we've got a working shot showing in situ charcoal or burning. So you might be able to make that out by that kind of very, very black round patch. And then you can see that this is where one half of the feature has been excavated. Then on the other side, you kind of have quite what I would call an ephemeral, so like a hazy interface between the fill of the feature and the natural geology. So we're trying to look for those changes in soil colour and also changes in texture as well. So if the ground is naturally, the geology there is naturally clay maybe, or a sandy clay, then you get a fill that's very, very different. That helps us determine what part is natural and which part has a anthropogenic, so a human element to it.
And how many years did it take before you start to spot those differences on site?
You'll pick it up pretty quickly. Once you've dug a couple of ditches, you'll start to get your eye in. So when you're on a site, you'll think, oh God, it all looks the same. And then you start to think, oh, actually, no, that's a mid-brown compared to a slightly mid-reddish brown. And then you're on for a winner. Okay, so Emily did mention in her video that they're looking at a post-medieval area, and that's what we're looking at now. So it's no longer Roman, we've moved on to post-medieval, and she's talking about there's actually a big trackway. This is an image of one of the excavated slots that has a trackway. What's really important about this is that it's not just a ditch with two ruts in it. Those ruts were made from wheels, and the depth of those wheels is from that constant purpose and constant use. So we've got a route here that was used by the people of Leeds a few hundred years ago, would have been incredibly popular, and we're seeing basically an early sign of a road or track. We'd also have quite a few different people travelling on the route. So I believe, Tash, you've got a little poll to test us now.
Yes, I am. I'm going to test everyone. So I'm going to launch this poll, and you can it's multiple choice, so just give it a go. It should appear on your screen now, hopefully. So what do you think made the imprint, the one on the right? So there's something there, so I want to see if you can figure out what it is. So I'll give people a few seconds to vote on that. This is quite a tricky one.
It is hard.
So a few more seconds to vote. We've got a winner, but a tiny bit of a split between the three answers. So last 5 seconds to vote. So I can reveal that the majority of people think this is an animal hoof print. So Emma, can you reveal whether they're correct or not?
I think they could all come and dig on the site. So yes, so we think that the image on the right where the scale bar is, it is possibly a animal hoof print. So if you kind of pick your eye out and think about what a horseshoe would look in the ground, we've got that kind of U shape going this way, and we've got those two fingers or element, or the U shape of the horseshoe kind of going up, and we may be able to distinguish potentially some part of like the hoof pad itself. So a lot of our work is interpretive, and we'll also use science to help support that as well.
Wonderful. So we've seen a lot of features and dug out features on the site, but what happens to the soil that's removed to uncover these features?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So our archaeologists spend a lot of time digging out that soil, and we do a lot of recording as well. But once that soil has been removed, it just doesn't stop there. We actually rely very heavily on environmental evidence, and that's a question of looking basically at the soil we take from those features or from those deposits, and we'll take it back to our labs. We've got labs in Sheffield and Salisbury, and we'll look at those small pieces of plants and seeds and insects. They all get preserved in the ground and in those layers of soil. They can actually stay there for thousands of years until we come and dig them up for processing. So we'll look at those micro remains under a microscope, and we hope to find evidence of maybe tiny insects, burnt seeds, and sometimes very, very small artifacts. So I've had post holes before where I couldn't find anything, tiny post hole, and then the environmental team has found an amber bead in them. So we'll also, by taking those environmental soil samples and looking at them under a microscope, we start to build up ideas of what their life was like back in the past and get a real strong visual idea.
I think that leads to the next slide. What is this?
Brilliant. So like I was saying, even the smallest seeds can actually give us the biggest picture about the past. These are two reconstructions. They're actually from different sites. They're not from East Leeds Orbital Route. But what I really like about them is that both of these reconstructions are made up or verified by the environmental samples that we've taken and the environmental evidence from those samples. So the amount of animals you see in the Iron Age farming settlement, to the style of fencing and the plants and trees that are growing in the Roman one, all these elements are brought in and verified by the environmental evidence that we get from site. So it's not just, it's full of secrets about the past that we can reveal through science.
Wonderful. I think that brings us to the next part of our webinar. I'm going to go back to Jenny to look at some more finds. So hello again, Jenny.
Hello again, thanks Emma and Tash. Yeah, we've actually had a load of finds that have come in from Emily and her team. They've been doing a fantastic job. So we've been kept on our toes looking through everything they've brought back for us. So we thought we'd start with something and maybe get your opinion on what you think it might be before we explain how and why we determine what things are.
That's right, I've got another poll for everyone. So I'll launch this one and I just want to know what you think the object was used for. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to vote on this one. This is quite a tricky one as well. I've not made these polls easy. Last few seconds to vote. And again, we've got a clear winner and a bit of a split. So I can reveal, Jenny, that most people think these are industrial tongs.
That's really interesting because I wasn't completely sure when I first saw these what they were either, but our specialist in Salisbury, Lorraine Meffam, she has determined that these are in fact nutcrackers. They are brass and they date to the 18th century. Now that might sound a bit vague, but a lot of the time in archaeology we date things to quite a broad period and we can't always specifically pinpoint to a year or even a decade. So to be able to identify these as 18th century is pretty useful. There's also some very comparable ones, pretty much identical ones on the Portable Antiquities Scheme, which is basically a site which has been set up by the UK government to encourage people who might come across artefacts just themselves, members of public, to record them. So there are other ones exactly like this, and they have been determined by others as well as our specialists to be nutcrackers. So these ones are not engraved in any way. Some of them sometimes have initials of the person who owns them or something like that. But if you look at the base where the hinge is to the right-hand side of your picture, just above the 10cm mark, thanks Ash, these bits have got little pricks kind of dented into them. And we assume that would be to try and hold the knot in place there. And then further on, you can see lines, little just decorative grooves, basically, with little lines etched into them and notched into them. And then the rest, the circular part, which I think is where people were getting differential ideas of what they were. I thought that might have been to hold something in place, but actually others, specialists, have determined that this is the handles to actually crack down on the nut and smash it to pieces. So an unusual find, but they are nutcrackers apparently. But if anyone else has other opinions, we'd be very interested to hear what you think they might be.
I think you've got another find to show us as well. I think for this one,
Yes.
we've got Beth down in Salisbury again to show us the find live on camera.
So Beth is going to show you one that she's got down there in person, and the others, these are all basically the same type of artifacts. They're tokens, and this one that you can see that Beth is holding is a rounded one, and then the other one that you can see the main picture is a pointed, five-sided one. So what these are, if we have a look, is that they are tokens for exchanging for goods or products or money. So the five-sided one is stamped with the words Cooperative Society Limited, half a crown. And basically the Co-op Society began in 1847, in Leeds, and the earliest one was in Rochdale in 1844, and it was particularly strong because the north of the country was very industrial, didn't have maybe as many wealthy people, you had lots of people living together. So the idea is a bit like a rewards card today. So if you became a member of the Co-op Society, for example, and you did all of your purchases and shopping there, you get something back for being a good customer. So a bit like if you bought something, clothing or groceries, you can get some money back as tokens, which you can then redeem in the store. So this one is for a monetary value, half a crown. But we also get other ones which are completely different. You could get them for flour or bread, and the one that Beth is showing you up in the corner is actually one for tea. And this is a particularly interesting one for those of you who are from Leeds, because it's stamped on one side with London Tea Company, transferable £half, and on the other side it has 113 Kirkdale, Leeds, 1884. So basically this is a token that you could redeem for £half of tea, but only from the London Tea Company and only from their shop, which was in 113 Kirkgate in Leeds. So these are a fascinating insight into how people, how they live their daily lives, all the different types of the ones you can see that have been found by Emily's team as well, and also just the specifics of an actual shop that we know sold tea in that particular time in Leeds. So they really provide a fascinating, detailed insight into the lives of people.
Thank you. And were these found all over the country, or are they generally found in Leeds or Yorkshire?
They're found quite a lot more in the north of the country because, as we were saying, because of being industrial and people living in large cities much more, they would kind of need to have a little bit of help maybe to buy things. A bit like you might get, people might rely on getting some money back or something, or you might walk into a shop sometime and just go, I'll go for the buy one, get one free. So these tokens are found more in the north of the country, but they are found in the south, and we'll be looking into them a bit more to see if we can find any more about these particular ones.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to go back to Emma. Emma, there
Hello
you go.
there.
Nice to see you again. I'll go to the next slide.
Fantastic. So many of you know, probably if you're from the area, about the scheduled monument of Barnbow. So Barnbow National Filling Factory is an important monument, and with many families in the Leeds area, I'm sure you still have connections to the site within living memory. Barnbow was actually the nation's first filling factory in World War I, and is also the most complete surviving First World War filling factory nationally. So with nearly an entirely female workforce, bamboo also played a significant role for the rights and status of female workers too. The women manufactured actually an enormous amount of shells, and by 1918 they were producing around 10,000 munitions per week. So if you can imagine that, with that amount of shells, transportation and logistics were hugely important in this operation, and train tracks were often used to move materials, sometimes within one part of the filling factory to the other. So we're actually currently undertaking a highly monitored topsoil strip with permission from Historic England, and in a partial section of the Skenwood Monument. So with a bit of an update for that, I want to pass you on over to my colleague Emily, who can give us some really amazing information about how the what they've been finding so far in that very specialised area.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry I've got no pictures for you for this bit, so you'll have to use your imaginations. But the last couple of days we have begun the topsoil strip, as Emma said, and we're looking. Whilst the excavation doesn't directly impact the factory site itself, we're looking at the arms into the factory. There's a northern arm and a southern arm, which provided the routes in. And in the north particularly, we've been looking for any evidence of the railway or the tracks that ran into the factory, and we have now found some. As I say, have to use your imagination. So the materials themselves have gone, so the sleepers have gone, the tracks have gone, any sort of associated mechanisms have gone. But what we have running across sort of the brow of a small hill on the north is a series of sleeper shadows. So we've got the imprint of where the railway sleepers would have been, and they're kind of defined with a dark sort of industrial clinkery sort of quite rough fill, which they stand out beautifully against the sort of orangey brown natural deposits up there. And it's a good test for us because obviously we're very used to working in metric, but railways were not built with metric measurements, so we're cracking out our old tape measures and getting all the measurements in feet and inches to make sure we record it as accurately as we can as it would have been built. So that's the bamboo update.
Thank you very much for that, Emily. And now I think I'm going to hand over to you to ask questions. So if you have any questions you would like, pop them in the question box. So that's just here on your control panel. And I'll take a few minutes to go through your questions and then get everyone up on screen and we will answer some of your questions. They're just in the question box, and the panel will turn on their webcam so we can see them ready for questions. Perfect, thank you. So one question we've had come up, I think this one will be for Jenny, is asking what will happen to the artefacts after we've kind of looked at them and we've finished with them.
Well, it's quite a long process really, and the more detailed the site is, the more expensive the site is as well, then the longer it can take for them to actually appear in a museum. But what happens is throughout the process of excavation, the whole time this is going on, we liaise with the museum, who is under the jurisdiction of that collecting area. So we know whose museum it's going to go to, and we'll keep them updated with progress the whole time. We can only actually arrange to give the finds to the museum once all of the reports are written, all the publications are done, all the drawings are done, everything is completely done and dusted, and we won't need to access the stuff anymore. So that can take a couple of years. And then once we have got to that stage, we discuss with the museum what they'd like to take. Sometimes if they already have huge amounts of CBM, say ceramic building material, they may say, we don't actually have enough space for that, but we will happily take all of your pottery that you've got. And then we will arrange all of that, which can take another couple of months to do the paperwork, etc. And then we arrange a day to deposit with the museum. Some museums can only open for us to send stuff to on certain days. So it can take, for a site that's really big, many years before you'd actually deposit it with the museum, and possibly even more before the museum can arrange to have a display made. So you're really quite lucky to be able to see these finds here today.
Thank you for that. I'm getting lots of questions in, so I do apologise if I don't have a chance to ask everyone's questions, but we will get back to people after the webinar. A question that's come up quite a few times is, how much longer will we be on site? Emily, can you say anything about the future and how much longer you expect to be there, or what you'll be working on next week?
We do still have excavations underway. We're nearing the end now. We're down to our last couple of sites. The majority of it has been excavated and has been recorded. I'm not going to make any promises, but yeah, it looks like we'll be off sort of middle of next month, I think, and into the sort of post-excavation phase. So once we're off site, the work hasn't finished. We've still got an awful lot to do in terms of gathering all the information together. Jenny's got a lot to do with the finds. Our environmental team have got to deal with the processing of all of our samples. We've got all the reports to produce. So yes, we are due to be off site soon, but that doesn't mean we're done.
Glenn, do you want to add anything on what will be happening on the site over the future?
Yeah, I guess that's the for us. When the archaeology is complete, the earthworks will begin in earnest with the bulk earthworks movement. So as Emily suggested there, probably in the middle of next month, you'll start to see the earthworks really kick in on all fronts as we try and utilise the back end of the summer to get a lot of the material moved as soon as possible.
Thank you. We've had a few comments as well on what people thought the nutcrackers may be. One person said something for repairing horses' feet. What do you make of that, Jenny?
I don't know much about horses, so I couldn't answer that one. However, one of our finds person down in Salisbury actually works a lot with horses, Erica. So maybe she could get an answer for you on that one.
Thank you. And another question, someone's asked about how does one end up becoming an archaeologist? So Emma, do you want to answer that one for us?
Yeah, so I don't really have a typical route into archaeology. I did do an undergraduate and a postgraduate degree, but they were in film and then in English literature. I sort of fell in love with this romantic view of old archives and thought, yeah, that'd be really cool, let's have a nice job there. And then the economy crashed a bit and there wasn't really work in that. But then I was very lucky to get an internship with Wessex. So I got a paid internship just for 3 months. So I was in the basement, in the archives, looking at all these wonderful boxes. And then one day my boss said, I just feel about digging. And I thought, I'll give it a go. And 6 years later, you just can't stop me. I love it. So my route was non-academic, but through an internship.
Oh, thank you. What about you, Emily?
I came down what I suppose is the slightly more conventional route. I went through school, was a point where you were choosing what to do after you'd done your A-levels. I had an interest in I was more interested in the sort of geography and landscape than I was in the history side of it initially, but I went on to look at options of degrees and came to Sheffield University to study archaeology. Did 3 years in my degree course. Got to the end of that, was lucky enough to get a job with a company where I spent quite a long time excavating in Bath, which was special. And yeah, that's me. I've been in archaeology with a few little breaks ever since.
Oh, thank you. And I think the final question, because I'm just aware of the time, we've got a few minutes left, was how to find more information on the site. So I have a few links here for people on the side, so a website and an email address, but I will also be sending a follow-up email, and that will have links to things like the Sketchfab images that I showed you, so you can have a look at our Sketchfab website, and also to the Leeds website. Do you want to say anything about the newsletter, Glenn?
Yeah, we produce a monthly newsletter, which is quite informative, gives you progress update on the scheme and also events such as this. So if we haven't got your details already and you're not on our stakeholder distribution list, please send us your details and we'll add you to that list. I said they're monthly updates and they'll continue throughout the scheme as it progresses. We're in the stages as well of updating material on the project website. So we're conscious that some of the material that's been on that website's been there for probably 3 or 4 years now. We're just coming to the end of the detailed design, and we're working on an interactive 3D model. So I'd say within the next 2 to 3 weeks, you'll start to see new material being uploaded onto the website.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. But as I said, I'll send a follow-up email, and I will also put a link to a feedback form in that email. So if you do have the time, please fill that in, and it will help us to improve these webinars for the future. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you've had as much enjoyment watching it as we have putting the information together for you. So thank you and goodbye, everyone.